Hi, everybody. I think it is officially good afternoon because it's just gone 12 o'clock in Sydney time, which is where I'm tuning in from. Thank you to everybody who is streaming in at the moment. We're here today to talk about flexible communications, looking back at the Olympics of 2021 with some reps from the Australian Olympic Committee. So today we're joined by Public Relations Manager Dominic Sullivan. We've got Social Media Manager Georgia Thompson. They're going to talk about some of their flexible strategies for high-performing comms in such a massive time of change. We've also got Isentia's Insights Director, Nairi Crawford, with us today to have a look back over some of the social and traditional media trends of the games that was. For everybody that is just tuning in, I just wanted to do a little bit of light housekeeping before we get into the conversation today. So your microphones have been muted for the session today, but hopefully you can hear and see us loud and clear. We have muted your microphones, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you in this session today. I've got loads of questions for Nairi, for Georgia, and for Dominic, but I'm going to try and leave some time for the audience as well at the end today to ask any questions that you have, maybe about some of the campaign successes, maybe some of the challenges, maybe some of the trends that Nairi has seen across the games. And so the best way to ask those questions is to head to the right side panel of your screen using the GoToWebinar technology. You've got a little speech bubble there where you can type something in the chat area, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And there is a question mark to leave a question as well. So as long as I don't get too excited trying to pick the brains of everyone on this call, we will have time for your questions as well. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the panelists that we have in the session today. So I know that we've already said that Dominic Sullivan is a public relations manager with the AOC. So he's been with the AOC since 2018. So he's worked across multiple minor games, campaigns, and of course, Tokyo. We're so fresh from Tokyo today that both Dominic and Georgia are actually still in hotel quarantine on day 14, is that right?
Yeah, the end is in sight.
Final day.
I was chatting to these guys just before and I was like, you're looking pretty good for day 14. And being the sports communicators that they were like, I think we're getting a rush of adrenaline. The finish line is almost here. So they were very on message telling me about how they're almost ready to wrap up. But we've talked to lots of people for these Isentia conversation sessions, but I think this is our first hotel quarantine stint. So that's pretty impressive. We've also got Georgia, and Georgia is an experienced social media and digital campaign manager. So she's been with the Australian Olympic Committee since 2016. And so Tokyo 2020 is Georgia's 6th overseas games experience. So you're both really experienced communicators. We've also got Nairi Crawford with us today. So Nairi heads up our media research division for Isentia in the ANZ area, but she's also the global chair for the Global Young Leaders Group for AMAC. And AMAC is the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. So Nairi's going to be talking a little bit later in the session today about what some of those really successful messaging moments were and analysing some of those trends. But Georgia and Dominic, what I wanted to check in with you both about, you've both done loads of games experiences before. Dominic, you've also worked at the Commonwealth Games. How different was this year? I'll hand to you first, Dominic, and then go to Georgia. I know this might seem like a little bit of a loaded question, but just tell me about it. How different was this year compared to what you've worked on in the past?
Yeah, look, I know that it's been said a million times, and I've written it in so many speaking points over the past year as well, but it really was a games like no other. It was everything from the planning to the prep to how it was executed felt very, very different to other games, but it also made it pretty special in my eyes. I think some of the challenges that it threw up of even just the logistics of, we had to be in a bubble over there, the traveling media meant there was a lot fewer media on the ground and the opportunities for non-rights holders were a lot smaller. So trying to be creative to find ways that we can make sure that media can get the opportunities they want while still keeping ourselves and our athletes safe throughout a lot of challenges. But I think because of how different it was, it made for a really special environment as well. The spirit in the village, and from journalists that we were talking with every day, and from people back home, I think it made for a pretty special experience, and one that I don't know, hopefully won't be recreated. Hopefully by Paris the world will be in a better spot, but I think it made for a really really challenging but really special games experience.
What about you, Georgia?
Yeah, I agree. It was very different to the other games that I had been to, but the camaraderie and the spirit in the village was really unique in a really positive way. That there was a real sense of gratefulness, that everyone was so grateful that they had the opportunity to be there and to support each other, and that vibe was really fantastic. Plus, I think the fact that there were no crowds in the stadiums meant the virtual support that the team had was at a whole nother level, and that virtual feedback that athletes and the media were receiving was really special to be part of.
That's really interesting. I think you've both talked about a different level of support and gratitude. This isn't a professional statistic, but myself, I watched more Olympic Games than I ever have before. And I was into it. I always watch a little bit, but I think perhaps this year that might have a little bit to do with the fact that, like most of Australia while the Games was on, I was very much in lockdown. And so I know that that might not have been something that you were definitely expecting to happen, but what I saw was an Australia united by their love of sport, their interest in spectacle, perhaps tuning in to see some really big sporting moments. I was just wanting to understand, were you expecting that? Did it change the way that you were working? Did you perhaps need to switch up some of your messaging, knowing that lockdown people were in need of inspiration more than ever before? I'll go to you, Dom, and then maybe Georgie, you can tell me a little bit about what that looked like on social.
Yeah, great. I think firstly, the delay already put us in a bit of a change in messaging, that there were so many ups and downs over the year from 2020 to 2021 that the tone of gratefulness was a real driving force. So the athletes were grateful to be there. I think the AOC were very thankful that Japan could actually host us. You know, even our banners that we have on our Oz HQ in the village, we had 20-meter, in Japanese script saying thank you to the Japanese people for having us, that could be seen across the water for people outside the village. So that, I think, had infiltrated through to every part of the organisation in the year leading up. Not being able to predict that people were in lockdown, but I think it was a perfect storm of the same time zone in Japan, everyone being locked down, and really having time to watch. And then just this Aussie team, something that we couldn't plan for was just the absolute organic nature of how the athletes responded and how the athletes handled themselves in Tokyo. There wasn't any prima donnas. It was really, again, that gratefulness to be there, but that really came across as really humanized, I think, the athletes, and that very organically, without us pushing or prodding, it came out that how much it meant to them to be there and what it meant to hopefully lift the spirits back home as well. So it was a bit of a perfect storm, but I think it created that pretty special experience. Look, we added it into our messaging, and we made sure that was a part of it. But to be honest, the athletes really handled themselves really well, and it came out better than Georgia or I could script on PR or social fronts. That the athletes really lived and breathed it over there.
Yeah, it was interesting. We didn't need to change our digital strategy too much, to be honest, because I think we knew we were going to have this really positive sentiment once the sport started, and we work with these athletes year round, and we know how incredible they are. So it was really fantastic to see the Australian public get to know how incredible they are, and they were also real and authentic, whether it's Ariana Titmus's coach whose dance went viral, or it's even Kaylee McEwen swearing on live TV. They were just such real, authentic reactions that just made the athletes seem so real and relatable. And I think that really helped our content, because we were able to share their messaging, and it wasn't, our athletes are not kind of media robots. We work with them a lot to really encourage them to share their authentic stories from their own voice, and to not just answer questions how they think they should answer questions. We really want them to show their personality. And we even saw that with Sky Nicholson, the boxer, who was defeated earlier on than she would have liked, and she was so raw and emotional on TV, but it was athletes being able to express themselves in that way that meant the Australian public, it really resonated with them and they really connected with them. And so where we were in a position in our digital platforms to just really amplify that message, but also share that, you know, Australia is so proud of you message. We're all behind you. We feel your heartbreak, but we also feel your celebration and your joy. And we were able to really incorporate that messaging into a lot of our communications, which resonated really well with the Australian public as well.
And knowing that everybody was at home and maybe more people were watching than usual, did it mean that you were posting different kinds of stuff on social channels to try and complement that experience?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So because we were aware that more people than ever before were watching Channel 7, and the fact that we were also in the same time zone or an hour different time zone, it meant that from a social and digital perspective, our strategy was to be the leading resource on Olympic news. It was not to be the quickest or the first to get the facts out, because we very much understood that majority of the people were already watching it on Channel 7. They already knew the results, they knew what happened. So for us, our social strategy was to really add value to everyone who was watching as a second screen. So for example, on Twitter, that might be fantastic facts or did you knows that accompany results. So we had a stats guru on our team who was able to really quickly create these stats about this is Australia's second medal in the event, or this is the third fastest time run by an Australian. So on Twitter, we're really able to add value with those extra tidbits of information. And then on things like Facebook and Instagram, for us, it wasn't about being the first post out there. It was about having the most accurate post, with waiting until we had a fantastic hero shot that showed emotion. That was really important for us. And with our website content, ensuring that the articles that went live on our website had all of the facts, exactly how everything went down, the quotes, the results, the stats, to really create that depth and insight that you might not be seeing on other platforms, because everyone was watching it and everyone was reporting on it. So we really wanted to add value through our digital channels.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating, thinking about ways that we know that a lot of people already have the screen on, but how can you add value on the other screens that they might be using? Another question for you, Dominic. Are you able just to tell us about, was there a campaign success that you're looking back on, or what was a win, or was there a moment that you felt like the messaging was coming through really strongly to people at home?
Yeah, I think looking back, I guess in 2 weeks in quarantine, there's been some really good good times to look back on and actually refresh that. And apologies, I think that's my hotel phone, which is probably the Queensland Health checking in. So sorry, I'll leave that.
Do you need to grab it?
I might actually need to grab it, GT. I might throw to you. Sorry, guys. I'll be back in a second.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. It's the most authentic hotel quarantine experience we could have. What were your campaign successes, Georgia?
Absolutely. So we knew obviously that the medal moments were going to be highlights for our audiences, and of course they always are. But we saw a lot of success with some stories that, well, we did see the medal moments as well, but some additional stories like Peter Bowl, the 800-meter runner, his Sudanese family were all crammed together in Perth watching him run. The Rowan Browning story, where we almost had our first athlete in the final in, I think, since Sydney 2000. There were some really amazing key moments. But I think for me personally, a campaign highlight, and I'll probably end up stealing Dom's as well because we were there on the same night, but was the night that the Boomers were playing in the bronze medal match at the exact same time that high jumper Nicola McDermott was jumping for a medal. And there was a huge group of athletes and staff and officials in the Australian Village, and we had 2 TV screens up, one with Nicola on it, one with the Boomers, and everyone was lying in deck chairs screaming at the TVs, watching the Boomers shoot at the same time as Nicola jumps. I'm on my laptop covering the events live around all this atmosphere, and I just thought, you never get that experience anywhere else in the world. And the fact that we got a silver medal and the bronze medal, and both of those sports made history, just added to it as well. And I think the excitement consuming it in a social space everyone else around Australia felt that excitement from those iconic moments too. So it was really cool to really share that excitement, social and in person in Tokyo.
Dom, you've checked in. They're okay?
Yes, all good. Yeah, they were trying to change the the last test and checkout procedure, so I just said, yeah, I'll put that back an hour. It's all good. Sorry about
Awesome.
the interruption there, guys. But
No worries. Did you have a campaign success you wanted to share? George has definitely already covered the deck chairs, and that moment with Peter Bowles' family is so iconic. But what was your win from the games?
Yeah, I guess the games is quite funny because we do so much work in the lead up, which is a lot of proactive, you know, putting on media events for team selections and uniforms, and that feels a lot more us doing a lot of the lead up work and trying to get these media wins, whereas the games are so all consuming once we're in there that you know, everyone's watching Channel 7, everyone's reading the reporting, so it's less about how are we going to do this proactive media op, but how do we make sure the media on the ground can get what they need, and hopefully as many Australians as possible find these other stories. So for me, I guess in that regard, I love some of the maybe the lesser known athletes before the games, like Harry Garside. 2 years ago, actually it popped up on my Google Photos yesterday. 2 years ago yesterday, Georgia and I were in Canberra to do a processing session, meeting athletes. They get fitted up, we grab content, we do a media day. And Harry, the boxer, was one of the athletes we met, and we both left that just thinking, geez, I hope that guy makes it, because he has charisma just coming out of his ears. He's just so interesting, and wow, if he makes a team and Aussies get to meet him, they're going to love him. And so from that 2 years ago, to see he just scraped in because all the qualifications changed up, the fact that he was able to make it, and then this guy that we've been, you know, pitching, you know, directing media to in the lead up over the last year, hey, this guy's got an interesting story, you might want to have a chat to him, see this little build up, and then to see it explode with how much everyone loved him back home. I think they're the stories that I really love, and that's just one example of you know, someone's personality and their incredible hard work to make an Olympics and win a medal kind of coming together. And I think, yeah, I think that's probably one of my favorite moments there.
That sounds awesome. You've talked a little bit about getting the information to the media that needed to get out there. Nari, I wanted to cross to you now. As someone who was on the other side of those screens that Georgia and Dom have been referring to today, what are some of the themes that you've seen coming through really strongly on traditional and social? Like what's your experience of these games been?
Sure. I think anyone who's heard me talk before knows that I'm a big fan of kind of themes and narratives, and especially themes that are likely to endure past a particular event. So there's kind of four major things that I was really focused on looking back at the games period, and the most probably enduring impact that this games has had, I think, is that really deep and more nuanced discussion and public discussion about the role that mental health plays in elite sport. So certainly from the perspective of that being a really necessary component to reaching peak, but also the impact that being an elite athlete can have on your overall and general well-being, I think is a really interesting discussion. And I think it's also one of those discussions where you can see that intersection between social media discussion and support and more traditional opinion leaders in traditional news. So especially when you look at the global conversation around Simone Biles and the really difficult commentary that would come from more traditional media outlets, particularly in the US, and the way that conversation kind of played out and changed online was really interesting. And you could see that there's a real shift in how media are trying to frame conversations about mental health. They're obviously not there yet, and there's still a few things that are particularly complex about that. But when you take those kind of opinions out of it and those opinion pieces out of it, from a general kind of framing perspective, there was quite a high degree of care and a high degree of being able to show opinions that supported her decisions and her points of view, and that may not have been there a few years ago. And I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. I think the other enduring conversation will be around transgender athletes, and that's something that is still in kind of its infancy of understanding, especially online. You can see that there's a lot of unstructured discussion about how that works and how that plays out. There's a couple of examples I've got on this slide here about New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard, and the fact that there was still some really terrible things being posted online, and that business owners particularly were really taken to task for what they were saying about her achievements and her selection for the games. And I think that's just kind of a continuation on that theme that we often talk about in this setting, about knowing what the cultural pulse is on an issue and being really on top of how people are feeling or understanding an issue, and knowing that while risk is something to always be concerned about, a lot of it is just making sure that you understand how an opinion is going to be reacted to. And I think one of the other slightly nerdy things I was really fascinated about was ratings. So while the time zone thing for Olympic Games is always interesting and how it impacts ratings, the UK and the US, who are obviously in a slightly less restricted environment right now, had a lot of difficulty with viewership for the games. But one of the elements for that's really interesting is the increase of platforms and the impact that has on how you can actually measure viewership. Just for the NBC, for example, there were 5 or 6 different ways that they expected audiences to connect and view content, and that actually made it really hard to know what they wanted to look at and when they were going to be able to do it. And then probably the last kind of nerdy point that I'll leave with is just an Australia and New Zealand point, where when you look at Google Trends, the most likely thing to be Googled from an Australian audience was the medal tally, and then comparing the medal tally to Rio. And for New Zealanders, it was a little bit more about where they could access and where they could watch the game. So I just thought that was a little fun trend there.
That is a fun trend there, and 27 million tweets about the Olympics is pretty wild. I'm interested in what you've shared today around some of those themes about social justice coming through quite strongly when the games were being discussed online. Georgia and then Dom, I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well. Is that something that you always expect when you're heading into an Olympics? How did you prepare for some of those discussions that might come up around things like the transgender athletes that were taking part in the games this year?
Yeah, sure. I'll let Dom speak in a second to how we respond to those socio-political issues, but from a digital perspective, that is actually a key audience that we identified a few years ago that really shape our communications at the Games. So we have 4 key audiences, and one of them we call our Sport for Social Change, and that audience they're not necessarily people who are huge sporting fans or watch sport year round, but they're people who engage in sport when it also ties to a socio-political conversation, such as transgender or ethnicity or diversity, whatever it might be. And so we actually have identified that as quite a key engaged audience for us at Games time, and we factor that into our content to think about, okay, what content are we creating that will really positively influence conversations in this space? So for example, our team this year was 53%, you might have to correct me on that one, but 53% females, and that's a really fantastic stat that we'd like to share and really highlight our female athletes. We also had more female gold medalists, which is a really nice stat. We had Shaney Williams, who's the captain of the women's Aussie Sevens team. She sought permission from both the International Olympic Committee and the Australian Olympic Committee to wear her rainbow headwear when she ran out onto the field. And that was a fantastic story that we were really keen to share, to see Shaney running out in her rainbow headwear and representing her community. And so we're very aware of these conversations, and we position ourselves in a position where we can encourage really positive conversations in this space. Also seeing a lot of was a lot of really organic content that surrounded our Indigenous Olympians as well. We had 16 Indigenous Olympians in the team, which was our largest percentage of Indigenous athletes in an Olympic team. And we had cultural hubs in the village and Indigenous artwork that was created by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Olympians that was decorating the village. It was very integrated into the look and feel that we created for the Team Oz over in Tokyo. And that content was very organically pushed out across social and website as people were taking photos in front of the artwork. They were putting their pin on the map of the Indigenous lands in Australia and chatting with our Indigenous Advisory Committee who were over in Tokyo. So these conversations, we like to be able to really have positive conversations in this space that address some socio-political issues that are in the headlines at that time. And Dom, do you want to talk to kind of how we respond to that in terms of a media management space?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Georgia, I guess what the village looked like from the First Nations perspective, where you just had this massive artwork kind of covering walls, and that was really, it was put there, and in a way it was fantastic so that athletes from all backgrounds were getting these photos and sharing it and really feeling connected to that piece. And to have Kyle Vanderkuyp, who was running the cultural hub, to be chatting with athletes and kind of going back through the story of each different First Nations area was such a massive asset, and a lot of the athletes' feedback has been really fantastic about that. I think there was when the boomers flew in, there were really big delays at the airport depending on when you arrived, because you had to do all this different testing, and I think it was about 8 hours from wheels down to when they got into the village, which is a pretty long wait time. But Patty Mills the next day was speaking to Kyle Vanderkuyp and said, "I'd wait for days to walk in a village like this where I feel so at home." And to have that happen in a space where it was quite tricky trying to get just the environment of 2021, but to have the village be this safe place for kind of the whole Australian team was I think a really great move by the organisation, and I think it really played out in the impact both in the media. There was some really great coverage of it, but more importantly about how the athletes felt and received it. In terms of how we respond to different issues like that, particularly in around the Black Lives Matter movement and how sport played a role in that, we're really lucky that we have a really strong and active athletes commission. So the athletes commission, which has athlete representatives from a range of summer and winter sports. When this was first, I guess, hitting the headlines last year, that they did actually go out to the whole Olympic cohort with, surveys around, hey, these are the current rules. What do we want to change? What do we think we should be able to do? And so to be able to have that really guide the organisation of getting our athletes' perspective is a really, really big benefit, because that does allow us to come from a position where we're working for the athletes as well, rather than trying to impose rules or try to be the cop in certain situations. So it's really a really great privilege that we do get to work with these athletes and get their perspective on it. In terms of, I guess, the Laurel Hubbard selection to the games, so I was managing the team selection for the Australian weightlifting team up in Brisbane a couple of months ago, and Charisma is an Aussie athlete, and she competes in the same weight class as Laurel, and so obviously that issue did drive a lot of the media attention there. It was a full media pack, and that question did come up, but I think we had our messaging, and that we want to operate within the rules, and we have, I guess, what we say as an organisation. But again, I come back to what the athletes feel about it and how the athletes express it can be so much more powerful. And I think that's what Charisma said on the day, and what she said since around how she competes and how she, really respects and works with Laurel, helped drive the conversation from the Australian point of view. And that's a really good asset to have. Of course, we did, we're all communicators. We did the prep in the background, so we knew that all of our weightlifters would be asked a question. We have a chat with them, just make sure that they're comfortable and that they're not surprised by any questions that come up. But I think that really speaks to, I guess, a driving theme for how we've operated is, athletes first, whether that's on social through GT's channels, or whether that's what we're doing on the athlete front around the media front, where we'll have our chef de mission or our CEO take organisational questions, the tricky questions, and just leave athletes to talk about their story and their journey, and hopefully help Australians get to know them, because as we saw over the past month or two, that really resonates and that really sticks with the viewers. And I think that's one of the bigger outcomes that we can have, that we have our spokespeople can handle the rough stuff, and then we make sure that the athletes can be there telling their story and really focusing on them.
Thank you so much for going into that. It was really interesting to hear. Both of you talked a little bit about prep work, or things that you might need to get ready so that the athletes can tell their stories. We've talked today about flexible communications, or how to pivot your communication strategy. I think that we probably have never had a webinar before where we've got such a live example of needing to communicate flexibly, with phones going from Queensland Health, hotel quarantine. You've probably never had to do this before. And I think sometimes communicating flexibly actually means something different. Sometimes it means that you have planned incredibly comprehensively. So I just wanted to hear a little bit from both of you. Dom, I'll throw to you first, and then to you, Georgia. What did planning look like for Tokyo 2021? How do you plan for something that comes around every 4 years? It gets delayed by a year. There was a question mark right up until the opening ceremony. Were things like, what was actually going to happen? What were the changes? For anyone on this call that is in the space of planning out their comms strategy for their organisation, we'd love some planning inspo. Dom, what did it look like?
Yeah, no worries. Well, firstly, I guess for everyone on the line, I think we've all probably cracked out plans A to T throughout the past 18 months, whatever project we're working on, that we've had to, pivot a lot more than we might want to. But I think for us, that there are a couple of things. One is, we're a pretty lean team of around 6 people in our comms and digital team. With Strath, our head of comms, and Julie Dunstan is our media manager, and she's worked on every game since Sydney. And so leaning on people who have the experience. I know that we're in kind of uncharted waters, but having someone like Julie there, who had seen almost everything there is to see in that Olympic world and can really provide that advice, I think. So for me, one of the biggest takeaways is leaning on the people in your organisation that have that experience, and chatting with people outside your organisation that can provide that advice as well. The second part for me, I don't think it was one of those cases where we planned for every single outcome. It was more that we knew what our outcome we wanted to be, and we knew ways that we could get there. So for me, if we just talk about the last 6 months, that would be a whole lot of set media events for team selection announcements, for uniform launches, milestone days, essentially, proactive media ops. A lot of them had to change. They had to be pulled last minute, turned digital. Athletes couldn't make it into state, so quickly subbing it out. I think what I found is that really so much of my job is making media happy with the opportunities that they have. So it's making it work for them rather than making it work to the plan that I have. So whether that's little things like turning around which way we're facing because the cameraman says, actually it's a better shot going there. If it's going to work better for, to get better coverage that night, then I'll do it. It's about just being able to adapt to make it work for the media there. So from our proactive ops and building up these relationships with journos, that they knew that we would work our hardest to make it work for them, we could then apply that into the games scenario as well. So while making it work looked very different in a game scenario or a pre-game scenario, I think it was that intent to figure out what you can and can't do, and then how do you actually make it work. So for example, for one example at the games, at a normal games, you have what's called, you've got your rights holders, and they're allowed to film and get content in venues, which is the village, it's the competition venues, and then you might have what's called a grassy knoll, which is just outside the venue line. So your athletes do what they need to in the venue, you quickly walk them out, non-rights holders can get what they need, everyone's happy, the rights holder gets the first and the biggest shot, but everyone else is still taken care of. Because of the bubble protocols this time around, we actually couldn't do that. So just being able to, with myself and all the other media liaison officers, that we would then get film on our phone of different athletes on the bus from the venue back to the village, because it's outside the venue. we would then provide that to Jules in our media HQ, who would then shoot that through to the journos. And so it's a way that they would have footage that they're allowed to use that gets what they want in a different environment. So that was just one example where, look, it's not what we'd normally do. It's not the quality that they might not necessarily normally be used to, but it's a way that we try to get them what they need in a pretty challenging environment. And I think it's, sorry, I don't really have a full set plan of, hey, this is how I handle it. I think it's just having that intent to how do we make this work for the media? How do we give the opportunities there and then let the media do what they're good at and amplify that story across Australia.
Thank you. No, that makes heaps of sense. I think going through the plan from A to T would mean we'd still be on this call well into the evening tonight. What about you, Georgia? What does your planning look like ahead of the games?
Sure. So I can't tell you how many times our digital content plans had to change. We would have a great idea about athletes all getting together in this one spot to film a great video package, and then all of a sudden everyone was in lockdown again and we could only access certain athletes in certain locations, and which athletes can create content themselves. And so the plans without a doubt changed a lot. We actually captured so much video content in 2019 that we couldn't use in 2021 because athletes either didn't make the game, so they retired. So there was definitely a level of flexibility required. For us, it was really important that we were clear on our content pillars. And so if we could say that the content fit into the pillars and the goals that we were trying to achieve, it was okay if we had to change the plans or react to different situations, as long as we could say, okay, well, this still fits into our awareness category, for example, boosting awareness of our Australian athletes, promoting the games, ensuring that Australians were aware of it. Or it was fitting into our engagement pillar, which was all about emotive content, telling the athletes stories, creating that personal connection with the teams and that kind of space there. So for us, it was really important that we kind of kept those pillars. We also had our conversion pillar, which was about taking people who were just interested in the sport and only watching the Olympics every 4 years and converting them into loyal Oz Olympic team fans. So because we couldn't have spectators over in Tokyo, we created the Team Oz stand, where people could purchase virtual tickets to the Team Oz stand, which was a social media card with their name on it and their good luck messages that they could share on social. We created the Team Oz hub, where people could go every day to do trivia and win prizes and competitions and really engage with our team to create this loyal fan base. And the other pillar that was really important for us to service in the changing plans was our committed sponsors and stakeholders. So one of the examples that comes to mind is we had our Olympics Live activation, which was this incredible activation of Olympics Live sites in capital cities all around Australia, where people could go and they could watch the games, have a drink, catch up with friends, have a go activations. And Westpac was the major sponsor for the Olympics Live sites. 2 weeks before the games, most of the live sites are shutting down because everyone's heading back into lockdown. So there goes our Sydney live site, there goes Melbourne. Brisbane had a really good first week, but unfortunately they were closed in the second week. But for us, it was so important that we were still able to deliver a fantastic activation for our partner Westpac. So I think it was 2 days before the opening ceremony, and we just found out that a lot of the live sites were shut. I was on the phone to our digital manager and we said, right, we have this goal that we need to achieve. How can we tweak the plans that we've already put in place to achieve our goals for Westpac, but also for our digital activations? And we came up with Olympics Live in your lounge room, where we encouraged everyone to decorate their lounge rooms in green and gold and film videos of them watching the Aussie team and responding to that, and created a social media campaign around Olympics Live in your lounge room presented by Westpac. And the response from that was huge. It was so awesome to see all the kids doing mini Olympics in their lounge rooms and dressing up. And we had an Olympics Live in your lounge room hero who was our winner from the whole campaign, which Westpac provided a prize for. And yeah, it was just that pivoting of, we know what our major goals and objectives are, so how can we just change our content to fit the situation that we're in, but still ensure we're meeting those goals and key objectives.
That makes sense. I think what came through really strongly for me while you were talking is you had to be incredibly flexible, but with your content pillars and your goals being really strong and really clear, there were parameters to be flexible within, or you knew that you had to come up with some kind of incredible pivot with the change logistics to achieve that goal. Going back to one of the points that Nairi made before, touching on some of that wavering public sentiment ahead of the games. I know we've talked about live in your lounge room and that kind of camaraderie of watching the games that we all felt really strongly. Going into the games though, and going into the games in a pandemic, how did you prepare to address any of that public sentiment? How did it change your planning? What did your COVID messaging look like, Dom?
Yeah, so our COVID messaging, we obviously had a lot of, key messages, a lot of meetings to make sure that we were all aligned on that. Because really, every Olympics throws up a lot of different issues, and the risk register on any games or any big project is going to be very varied. But really, this was going to be the biggest one. I think for us, it was important to focus on what we could control, which is, how we're preparing our team and our conversations with the organisers, the Japanese government, and with the Tokyo organisers, and to really just keep on message that, look, the games are on, and this is how we're going to protect, Australian athletes. This is how we're going to protect the Japanese people, and then Aussies on return as well. So I think it was also focusing on the athlete stories and really why we needed these games. It's very easy with hindsight to say this games was amazing and it really united Australia, and what a great response. And I do know some of our biggest media critics were also our biggest supporters once the sport started and they saw the impact it was having. But this was a message that we were saying all throughout the start of the year, that this games will be very different, but it's going to be really important for the world to have. So having, I guess, that emotional messaging about why we think the games should go ahead, or why it will matter to the Aussies reading or watching the TV news on their, in their lounge rooms in the 6 months leading into the games, backed up with all of the info about how we were making sure that we're doing it in the right way and that this isn't reckless, that we're doing it in a really strong, positive way. So I think that's the iceberg of what we might say in the news grabs or what we might do is here, and the amount of messaging and work going on behind the scenes is pretty massive. So for me, I think that's also lunch. I just had a doorbell, so it's all happening in 2007 in Stanford. But
I wonder what's on the menu today. You have to let us know. So we've started to get some awesome questions coming through. For anybody that might have missed the spiel at the beginning, you can just find the question mark on the GoToWebinar panel, which should be on the right side of your screen, and you can enter in your questions for Georgia and Dom about their time at the games, or through to Nairi as well for any of the trends or the analysis that she's seen. So one question that maybe I'll throw to you, Georgia, and then to you, Dom, if there's anything that you wanted to add. So this is a question from Shan. How much work goes into preparing personal stories or background for each of the athletes? We know that you've talked about an athletes first way of communicating and messaging. So how much work goes into that so it makes great stories for the media? Is that done by you? Is it done by the media? Do you do it for every single athlete, or just the ones likely to get big results? What does that planning look like?
That's a great question. And in short, there's quite a lot of time and effort that goes into building that athlete story. So every single member of our Olympic team, all 486 athletes, have a really comprehensive bio on our website. And we bring on some external resources to help us create these bios. So we're aware that when athletes win medals and they have great performances, they're going to get a lot of coverage from a lot of external media outlets. But we take a big responsibility in sharing the stories of every single athlete, even if they're just from small sports where a success for them might be, a top 20 result, not a medal. That's their athlete achieving their best. So we actually put a lot of time into creating these really extensive bios on our website. We also do that in conjunction with our national sport federations. So we work hand in hand, especially in Dom's role, with the media managers of every single one of our sports, because they know their athletes inside out. So it's really important that we work really closely with them to build their bios, but to also profile them for different media opportunities that come up. So if I want to do an Instagram takeover where an athlete takes over our accounts for the day to show us a day in the life, I will work hand in hand with that media manager to select an athlete who will really love that opportunity, who has a story to tell, who feels comfortable in that position. So there is a lot of work, and people often ask, the Olympics are only once every 4 years. What are you doing outside of that? And a lot of that time is spent researching our athletes, building their profiles, giving them a platform outside of Olympic times, because we know they've got great stories to tell and we really want to share those stories.
Yeah, and
Was
just
there anything
echoing
you
that,
wanted to add, Dan?
yeah, absolutely, because I think the we're a team of 6 in business as usual at the AOC, but we swell to about 40 or 50 in the comms team as each of the sports kind of come on board. But what we absolutely couldn't do what we do without the massive work of all of the national sporting federations. So and that's not just at games time to make sure that we have these stories ready. That's maybe where we come into the fold around their team selection, or when they're, I guess, in the Olympic limelight. But when you've got media managers for sports like paddle that are helping get front page stories about their 2 of their sprint canoeists who one's a paramedic and one's a firefighter, and each of these sports work closely with their athletes, they can pull out these stories and really help tell them. So really, while we just came off the back of a massive month with a lot of these media managers part of Team Australia as well, what they're doing with their sport and athletes throughout those 4 years is absolutely massive. So there is a lot of work that goes into it, and a lot of that work is actually done by the sports, and not just us. We're in the green and gold.
Awesome. I've got 2 questions that I think are quite similar, so I might ask them together. We've got a question about what's the percentage of social content that's prepared beforehand, and then we've got another question about what is the split between proactive and reactive work. So I'll throw to you first, Georgia, because of the social component of that, and then over to you, Dom.
Interesting question. So it differs whether we're in games time or whether we are outside of games time. I mentioned earlier that we've got 4 key audiences, and one of them was our Sport for Social Change audience. I'll briefly touch on the others because that influences how we plan this content. Our major audience, which is most prevalent at games time, is Sport as a Passion. They're your dedicated green and gold fans who just get around it, they love it. Your armchair experts, they all kind of fit into that category. And for them, a lot of the content is quite reactive because they want to know about the results that are happening. So we can't predict a lot of that. Our other 2 audiences are Sport as a Family. They're the group where they participate in sport at the grassroots level. Mum and dad might help run the club. Grandparents pick up from sport. They're involved in umpiring or the tuck shop or whatever it might be. And their sport's really ingrained in their family life. And our other audience is sport as a lifestyle. So they're your Fitspo people who love to see the behind the scenes workouts and things like that. They're your retired athletes, your Olympic hopefuls, where sport's really part of their life in that way. And so for our Sport as a Family and Sport as a Lifestyle audiences, a lot of that content is planned in advance. They will be behind the scenes of a day in the life, training videos that people can join in at home, uniform, drills, a lot of that kind of behind the scenes of an athlete experience, whereas our content that's more for Sport as a Passion and Sport for Social Change, that tends to be a lot more reactive content because it's based on conversations that are happening in the moment, or the results or the medals, or an athlete who's just done a PB. So majority of our content at Tokyo would be reactive in that space. But we have a lot of processes in place to help us plan for that situation. So we have full suites of templates for all medals, for all records, sports snapshots, game previews, starting lineups. We've got a big extensive list of kind of templates that we use to anticipate the reactive content that we're going to have to create, so we can still create it really quite quickly and ensure it's consistent with brand. And similar with our written content, we have people assigned to certain sports so they know that if a certain situation happens, they're the person skilled who will write about it and share that information.
How about you,
Great.
Dom?
Yeah, on the media front, I guess at games time it's a little bit of both. So our proactive planning will be, each day we would have a press conference at the main press centre with a chef de mission and relevant athletes and, our chief medical officer. We would know that we would have certain sunrise crosses. We know that we would have certain beats that we would need to hit. But the reactive side is then, okay, who fills out those roles? So based on results, we'd react to, okay, this story happened. So, these are the people that should be heroed in this press conference. This is what the media are asking for, so this is how we should respond to that. Again, we had a proactive medalist plan, so we know once, if you win a medal, you've got your mix zone at the venue, you've got the press conference at the venue, you've got the podium plan as well. Then you come out, we might do something on the bus. You've got Channel 7 back in the village, and then we'll go do a grassy knoll at the village. So that's a plan that we knew, and then you just react to the results and kind of fill that out. So it was a nice little balance that we knew what we had to do, and that we'll just colour in the gaps with, based on the results, or not even just the medals, but, someone like Peter Bowl or Cedric Dubler and his support for Ash Maloney, that meant that Cedric obviously didn't win the medal and Ash did, but that then you bring Cedric along because that's really part of the story that captured him supporting him in that decathlon kind of final event. So it was nice to have, these skeleton plans in place that we could fill in while we're there.
That's interesting, those two little tidbits that you just shared, because there's a question from Matt, and staying with you, Dom, he's asked, did you have any strategies in place to manage communications when an athlete or a team didn't necessarily meet expectations for their performance? If everybody was hanging out for a medal moment and that didn't happen, what does the flip side of that planning look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, working with each of the sports, they would have their own plans. One of the things is, don't assume that you're going to be there on the final day. So don't hold off on doing media or hold off on doing something, assuming that you'll make it there. The second side is that, look, sport is raw and emotional, and we actually don't want to shy away from that. So some of the most moving post-game presses that I saw were, after the men's and women's hockey teams or the women's rugby, these ones that just absolutely tear at your heartstrings, or Sky Nicholson, as George mentioned earlier. And for us, we don't want to media manage our way out of that. We actually, I think that's part of the essence of why people connect to the Olympics. So for us, there was a plan in terms of what you needed to do after each event and how that looks like. But for us, it's, athletes walk through the mix zone. If you're happy or you're unhappy, we actually still want to tell that story. And on the ground, what that looks like is, I was media manager for our team out at beach volleyball, and was there for some of the BMX and the rowing to assist the media liaisons there. And generally they were quite good days. But if you're the media manager for hockey and you're there on the day that the Hockey Roos lose their quarterfinal, Nick had built up a relationship with the athletes, and he can then chat to them and get them in a good space to then go out and talk to the media. And I think for me, the big thing is, don't try to steer away from the emotion. I think that's, I really hate when you see athletes that are in kind of robotic mode and they're really not giving much. And sometimes they do that to protect themselves. I get it, but some of the, that emotion is why we all love the Olympics. So it's why, everyone celebrated Jess Fox's gold, because they saw how much it hurt when she had fallen just short. So I think that's all part of it.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that touches on that emotion that people needed when they were at home as well, like the realness and the rawness. You mentioned a couple of the newer sports introduced to the Olympics, and Bethany was curious, did you have specific strategies around those, promoting them, newer viewers, newer audiences, or did that develop quite organically? I'll stay with you, Dom, and then go to you, Georgia.
Yeah, no worries. So in the lead up, so probably since 2019, when we would try to do features and focus on these new sports, because just to connect them to the Olympic family. So we definitely did treat them a little bit differently, because you almost need that the education piece around how does the sport actually work for that Olympic family or Olympic audience that maybe didn't know that. It's also a great hook for us, when for us it was actually media were always interested when it was climbing or karate or surfing or skateboarding. These new sports really did create a nice media hook for us. So it did help us in my role. But at the games, they seem to explode as well. I think the fact that the athletes really bought in, like these surfers that, you know, are on the world tour and they go to amazing places and they have this professional league, and they absolutely bought in so hard from day one. The skaters as well, you know, like these athletes that really buy into the Olympic messaging really made it quite easy for us. I wasn't listening to it because I didn't have the 7 feed on for it, but I heard that the skateboarding commentators were fantastic. So I've got a lot of messages about them, that they helped introduce the sport in a really fun way. So that's, you know, big tick for Channel 7 for how they kind of help tell the story, because really most people are going to be introduced to the sport by 7, and I think they did a fantastic job right across the board with those new sports as well. And I think going to Paris, you're just going to have a lot more people that are now following our climbers and surfers and skaters. You know, I think it's really they did really well, and it's really it's a really good question, and I think it'll be fun watching them kind of grow now.
Yeah, no, that'll be cool, seeing what changes over the next couple of events. Georgia, I've got a couple of questions for you, and I am keeping an eye on time, so we're probably heading into the last couple of questions before we wrap up and let these guys eat their lunch. But there was a question for you around how differently do you treat each social channel? Do they have different audiences? And then really interested particularly to zero in on what your TikTok strategy was and why.
Sure. So as I mentioned, those 4 key audiences before, they kind of overarch all of our channels, but then we do have specific content strategies for each of our social platforms. Twitter, we're very much aware it's the breaking news, it's the quick bits of information, quick results, because we were aware that some people consume their Olympic results through Twitter as well if they're not necessarily watching it. Maybe they're at work and they've just got their Twitter stream up on the computer. We actually gave Twitter access to a lot of our media liaison officers like Dom, who were at venues, and part of their role was to be able to keep our audience engaged on Twitter with results, whether it was like halftime scores or at the end of a set or something like that. So it was quite quick information. With Instagram and Facebook, our Facebook audience, they do love a bit more detail. That's where we put a lot of our articles, a lot of our in-depth features. They want to know more about the athletes, more about their story, but then they also love a good photo. So obviously Instagram being the visual medium, there was a lot of cross-posting between Facebook and Instagram, because there's actually only about 20% of an overlap in audience between Facebook and Instagram. So if you think that, oh, I've posted this photo on Instagram, I don't want to post it on Facebook because I don't want people to see it again, you'll find that the layover is actually so small that there's a lot of value in duplicating that content. And we were seeing huge numbers with images across both platforms. LinkedIn, we keep it to our business audience. So LinkedIn is the only channel where we're under the Australian Olympic Committee. Every other platform, we're under the Australian Olympic team. We're the team first and we're athlete led. But LinkedIn is our business community, so we were a bit more restrained in the content that we share there. It might be the daily preview. We had a few features about, here's the business behind the success of high performance teams, so we know that specifically speaks to our LinkedIn audience. And TikTok was a new one for us that we launched on the 21st of June, so a month out from the games, and we saw incredible growth on the platform. We're at 145,000 followers now, and we saw I think we have something about 2 million video views. Strategy for TikTok's a really interesting one, and I won't pretend that I absolutely have it down pat and nailed, because it is such a new platform where to see what content goes viral and what content doesn't is really hard to determine. So for us, it was really taking a more casual Aussie larrikin kind of approach to the platform, where we had a bit of fun with it. We laughed, poked fun at ourselves, and we really enjoyed the content that we made on that platform, where a video that's had 3.2 million views is a video of a Getty image of athletes with some beautiful green and gold lights behind them. And then so that was Instagram versus reality of an athlete spraying a can of hairspray behind them to get the effect with the lights.
Yeah, I saw that. It was cool.
Yeah, 3.2 million views, and you just go, that's crazy. So for us with TikTok, we're having fun with it and we're just seeing what works, because the platform doesn't punish you if a video doesn't go viral. You're not punished, you're not losing followers. But just having a go at lots of different types of content, athlete selfies, behind the scenes, dog content's fantastic, just having a lot of fun with it. And again, duplicating some content that we'd create for Instagram Reels onto TikTok. Sometimes they'd perform much better on one platform than the other, but we want to give longevity to our content as well. It takes a lot of time to create that. And we'll also point out that a saving grace to me was we had a intern come on a couple of months before the games, who we then actually kept on during the games, who is a Gen Z TikTok fanatic who has grown up on the platform. And so I also leaned on her to say, you know, you've spent a lot more time on the platform than I have. So tell me what works, what content do you like to see? What are the trending sounds that you're hearing when you're on the platform just as a consumer? So leaning on her and our other content team to create the content was definitely a win there. But so sorry, I went a bit off topic there, but
no, that was awesome. Thank you for going into that.
Strategies for the platform, and happy to share any more insight on that after this chat if anyone has any questions.
No, that is awesome. So I'm just keeping my eye on the time, and it probably is time to draw this conversation to a close. I just wanted to touch on for all of our panelists, just briefly, was there a lesson that you learned from the games, either Nairi reacting to the media coverage of the games, or Georgia and Dom, was there something that you learned? Georgia, was there anything that you learned other than hire a TikToker to lean on during the games themselves?
I'd say the two biggest lessons that I learned is obviously the entire topic of this conversation is communication flexibility, not only so you can react to when things don't go your way, but so you have the flexibility to react to exciting new opportunities that you haven't planned. If your planning sits in a nice little box, something exciting might be happening over here and you don't know how to maximize that. So being flexible to say, hey, there's a story that we never thought was going to blow up, but it is, let's jump on that. That's been really valuable for us. And the other lesson is it's shared responsibility for communication success. So we are a small team of 6, and I know what Dom does in the PR space will greatly influence the messaging that I have on social, which impacts the articles that we're writing on the website. We work really close together with a very much shared responsibility for the entire communication success of the Australian Olympic team, and being able to trust each other and bounce off those ideas and keep each other in the loop is where we've seen a lot of our success comes from.
Awesome. What about you, Dom?
Yeah, absolutely the same. I think the team behind the team was a really big part of it, and that's our 6 of our normal kind of BAU AOC team, but then all of these amazingly experienced people that came on board to run during the games time, and I learned so much from a lot of them during the games as well. You know, these people that have worked in comms and media and have done a lot of games and have run rugby league grand finals and AFL grand finals, and just being able to never close your eyes or never close your ears to experience from outside your square. So I think I definitely learned a whole lot more over those 16 days than I had maybe in the 2 years leading up to it. So for me, it's about always being open to learning and growing from that. And then to echo GT, being able to be flexible but to still head to the same goal. So if you have your pillars or your goal that you're working towards, I think it makes it a lot easier to ride out the waves or to be, to just be able to overcome these challenges as they throw up. So for me, yeah, just being able to, if you have those core outcomes that you're after, it does make getting there still going to be tricky, but it does make it a lot easier to do, I think. And the final one is just absolutely just athletes to the front. I think everything that we do outside of games time, when you're pitching in these stories and you might not be having as much success because there's an NRL game on and, or there's an AFL game on and a lot of the Aussie sport media interest is in the here and now. I think you come off a games experience like that and you just think the interesting stories will absolutely rise. And if you can get that out there in the lead up so people know them already and then they're following them into the games, I think that's the final one for me, just making sure we keep getting athletes to the front.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. What about you, Nairi? For everyone who's tuning in today looking at planning and dealing with the media, what were some lessons learned looking back at what worked and what didn't about that coverage?
I think that the point about athlete led, I think, is really, really brilliant. In the same way that having your foundations right, I think, is really, really important. But I think this setting of sport is another way that we can see these really interesting and enduring conversations that are going to continue. And I think that level of authenticity that comes from being athlete led is something that can be really easily translated to other sectors as well. We've spoken about it a lot in terms of leadership in any format, and I think that's kind of a beautiful continuation of why that's so important.
Awesome. All right, we're 5 minutes over time. Thank you so much to Georgia, to Dom, and to Nairi. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. You'll hear from us again shortly over the next couple of weeks about the launch of our new Isentia platform, the flexible, nimble communications that we've heard about today. That's exactly why we're developing that new platform, to make sure that everyone on the call has the tools that they need to plan well, but then grab those opportunities like both Georgia and Dom were talking about today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and Georgia and Dom, enjoy your freedom tomorrow. Thank you for coming along today. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Bye.